Cloud. Welcome to another episode of Savor Food and Body. And we are talking with Amy Karnosh. Once again, you may remember her from our carb conversation and our cooking with sweeteners and all different kinds of sweeteners during the holidays. And now Amy is back to talk about protein and fats, particularly for women in midlife, and what we need to know about those, kind of debunking some myths maybe around those, and how can we, honor our health with gentle nutrition related to protein and fat. So that's what we're diving into today. And this will kind of complete our whole 3-episode series, even though it's been spread out over about, I don't know, 6-8 months. So you'll be able to see in the links in the show notes, you'll be able to go listen to the carb episode as well as our episodes on protein and fat. So as a reminder, Amy Karnosh is a nutritionist with a Master of Science degree from Bastyr University. And after closing her private nutrition practice, which we're going to talk about that in a second, Amy published Let's Eat, a book about food to introduce eating the rainbow to kids of all ages. She later co-founded the Yummy Mummy cookie company, Nutrition You Need and the Cookies You Want. And since retiring from the business, she currently helps companies create and adapt recipes for specialty foods and teaches people how to easily cook nourishing meals in their homes. Amy also works with Cancer Lifeline as a culinary instructor, and she's also an instructor for Seattle Culinary Academy. And you can learn more about Amy's work by visiting her personal website, nutritionadvocate.com. Again, there'll be a link in the show notes. So Amy, welcome back. It's going to be so much fun to talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I love talking about food, of course, but definitely all of these little nuances about nutrition that we hear about. We all know about protein and fat and fiber and carbs, but do we really understand what they mean? And often we don't. We don't, because we get so much of this information from websites and blogs and friends, and really at the end of the day from dieting culture that, let's just be frank, is most of the time flat out wrong.
Yeah.
So.
And like we talked about with the carb episode too, is that we get these blanket statements and these blanket claims to carbs, to protein and fat. And what I find in working with clients is those messages that they absorb, it's really confusing how to even apply that to their own lived experience. So particularly for women in midlife, like there's a lot of information out there about what we should do with protein. And most of us have grown up in the era of we should stay away from fat. And so we're getting all of these messages that we've had maybe the past 20, 30 years, and now meshing that with the current recommendations that we hear about. And so you're right, to be able to put into the context of like, okay, what do we know from a nutrition science perspective? What might we hear in culture? And what's actually going to apply to our lives in the here and now?
Absolutely. And especially with fat, you nailed it. We like to have that one small message, that brief sentence that makes sense, like reduce amount of fats. Okay, we could do that. But really, what does that mean? That forgets the fact that we have so many nuances. There's different types of fats. They act differently in our body. They have different roles. And if we were to actually just eliminate fats or reduce it considerably, we're actually doing more harm than good for the body. Fat is one of those macronutrients, those big nutrients that our body actually needs. It craves, our brain needs it to function properly. And if anyone going through perimenopause knows, your memory sometimes falters a little bit, no fault of your own. We tend to have drier skin. There's all these little things that are made a little bit more dramatic by not having the right type of fat, not having enough fat in our body. So those messages, while a small part of it might be true in some aspect, we are also individual, and knowing those specifics about what are the different types of fat? What does lower fat or higher fat even mean for you? And while we have to have some sort of averages, you have to come from somewhere. We have to make some recommendation as a greater country that has nutrition recommendations. We have to come up with an average, but that's taking into consideration that we have adults who are 4'7", we have adults who are 6'9". Average in there could be so extremely different than where your personal body is at. That is where we have to understand once again that what that recommendation is may mean something to you and may mean absolutely nothing for the health of your specific body, especially when we are aging, when we are moving through life and going through these significant, fantastic shifts like menopause. So there, I would like to stress that while we do have specific numbers out there, for me, when I am talking to people, I like to focus on really what that what the term fat means, and more importantly, that there are different types of fats. So where are we getting our fats in our diet from? Hopefully you are getting fat in your diet, healthy, wonderful, nourishing, moisturizing, brain empowering fats. And of those, you're focusing on those amazing sources that really do support the body for healthful movement through these phases of life, through our walnuts and avocados and olives and our small fish, if you include that in your diet. And that's another portion too. We all prefer to eat differently. So somebody eating one way for either religious reasons, social reasons, whatever feels good to you and your body, you'll get different fat sources than somebody else. So knowing where those fat sources are is really important too.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, especially bringing in that cultural perspective, because if we're talking about someone in midlife, late 30s on up to 60s, like they've been involved in their immediate family culture, in their heritage for a long enough period of time that they've got probably some staple foods that they always go to, or recipes or something. So I love that you brought that part in there. And the deal with fats in midlife in particular, what I hear a lot of my clients questioning is, are they healthy? Because many of us have grown up, like I said, in that fat-free Snackwells era. We all remember that. But yet at midlife, like we have those messages from our background. And now at midlife, we're seeing cholesterol increase. We might be seeing some of the other metabolic health markers increase. And so because we were taught those messages about fat, what I often find then is people go, oh, well, I'm seeing these numbers increase negatively. It must be because I'm eating too much fat. There's a little bit in there of like, well, I must need to cut some carbs too, especially related to their blood sugar. Like that message has started to trickle in too, which we covered in the carb episode. But when it comes to fats, when someone is seeing this cholesterol jump up, maybe even blood pressure, they're seeing the changes in their body size, increased weight in midlife. Where do you approach those conversations with someone who is in this stage of life around like that fats are healthy and why we need them? How do they relate, our dietary intake of fat? How does that relate to the cholesterol numbers we might be seeing?
Absolutely. And that is, once again, that's where our individual needs come in. Especially if you have a family history of heart disease, diabetes, any sort of illness state that puts you at higher risk for something. So you might be paying a little bit closer attention to these numbers in your hopefully annual exams with your physician, that those might come up. So before I go on, I just want to put that little asterisk in there again. All the recommendations or suggestions I'm going to say are really meant for individuals and not to be taken as 100% truth for everyone, because we're all at different stages. So with that being said, say we are seeing higher levels of cholesterol, which, by the way, as we age, all of that is sort of natural. We do have increased risks of things like osteoporosis, heart disease, certain types of cancers. That is a natural part of aging, is to have an increased risk. It doesn't mean you're getting it or you're more likely to get it. It just means that that risk is there. So we are paying a little bit extra closer attention at times to those markers. And one of those being, of course, cholesterol, right? So a really quick note on cholesterol: the total number of cholesterol is actually not as important. In fact, I might even say not really that important, as it is the balance of types of cholesterol. So whenever somebody says, I have high cholesterol, the first question I have for them is, all right, let's look at your HDL, your LDL, let's look at that ratio. Because sometimes total cholesterol goes up, but your HDL cholesterol goes up too. And that is not the type that tends to harden in our arteries. It doesn't actually increase our risk of any of these illnesses at all. So paying attention to that ratio is really important versus that initial shock or fear about having total cholesterol numbers go up. The second message we hear is often about fat, of course, but more specifically, saturated fat. It's because saturated fat really is often tied to total cholesterol. And so we're told, okay, if your cholesterol numbers are going up, we need to be decreasing our amount of saturated fats. And that could possibly be true. But once again, we're getting into, did you know that there's more than one type of saturated fat? And just because a fat is saturated, and by the way, when I say the word saturated, all that means is that that fat is stable at room temperature. It is saturated with hydrogens in its little chemical chain of carbons and hydrogens. It's saturated, or has a lot of hydrogens, so it means it's more rigid, so it's stable at room temperature. And there's different types of saturated fats. Not all of them are tied to cholesterol at all. Sometimes we think fat is cholesterol, but that's not true. Cholesterol is a type of sort of glycerol or glyceride that's associated with fat, but they're not exactly the same thing. So where does cholesterol come from is the first question. And cholesterol is in every animal food. So whether it be dairy or eggs or meat of any kind, and when I say meat, I mean the flesh of a fish or a cow or pig, any animal. It has cholesterol because that's an important component to making up animal cell walls. You need cholesterol to physically make cells of animals. So it's always going to be in animal products. You can't get cholesterol-free steak, for example. You can't get cholesterol-free butter. It doesn't exist because it literally makes up the cell walls. What cholesterol is never in is plants. Plants don't have cholesterol because they don't have the same sort of cellular structures. So you can have, for example, cholesterol or saturated fat from animals, and that would have cholesterol with it. And the potential risk for that is, depending on your personal health with your arteries and veins. And by the way, you can get a test. You can go to your doctor and request essentially an ultrasound, like a little scan of your largest artery in your neck. Super easy. Have that scan, and they can see if there's any hardening of the arteries. They can see how open that artery is. So I talk to folks all the time who say I have really high cholesterol. I've always had high cholesterol. I had these tests done and it looks like my arteries actually really clear. There's no sign of plaque or closing up. So it's not actually a big deal. We just are going to monitor it with our annual blood tests and exams. Fabulous. So if you do have a concern about that, number one, ask your doctor if they have access to that really simple, non-invasive test at all. Just like looking at your neck essentially with a little ultrasound, and they can check. So so if you do have, however, plaques maybe closing up of that veins or artery, and I just made that word up, closing, and that means it's now a word. If it's closing, then we have more concern. We want to make sure we're not adding to that. So if you have these saturated fats, so remember, a little more rigid, they have lots of hydrogen, so they're usually longer chains, especially animal saturated fats are long chains. And then you add to that these cholesterols, which I say cholesterol is kind of like a sticky glue ball, right? It's kind of sticky. You put it with a long chain of hydrogens and carbons, which are sort of rigid. And then you try to flow through the body, which has all sorts of bends and arcs in it. There's a higher chance that that could get stuck. And that's the concern. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's just that risk factor is there. So we want to reduce the amount of sticky, rigid fats in our bloodstream so we don't have that risk. So that's why we're told to reduce saturated fats to reduce cholesterol. Now, on the flip side of that, there are other saturated fats like palm oil, coconut oil, cocoa bean oil. Those are also naturally saturated. They're rigid because they have lots of hydrogens. They're stable at room temperature. Just think of your container of coconut oil, if you've ever purchased one from the store, sitting on the counter. It's hard, right? If you threw that in the refrigerator, you'd need an ice pick to get it out of the jar. So we keep it out at room temperature so it's soft enough. But those are called medium and sometimes short chain fats. And even though they're saturated, they have no cholesterol at all. So they don't have that sticky component to them. So that blanket statement of avoid saturated fat, greatly reduce your saturated fat content in your diet so that you can reduce cholesterol isn't always 100% correct either. It's more along the lines of, once again, you can still have fats in your diet, healthy fats, but looking at that balance. How much? How often? What type? Do you tend to use the same types of fats over and over? Are you like how I grew up in, fat? If it was fat-free and sugar-free, it meant it was healthy immediately. You could eat all you wanted, which hopefully we're moving beyond that. But we still you cook your bacon, you save that fat in a tin, and then you use that for something else later. So if you're focusing on, you're always using like bacon fat, butters, more animal fats are more concentrated in your diet, well, we might look at, okay, where can we substitute out? Do you like to dip your bread in a little olive oil instead of always butter? Where can we swap out different types of fats so you're not feeling like you're missing something? You're not being satisfied by your meal anymore if you just took that fat away. But can we swap it out with different types that are a little bit easier for your body to use? They're those types of fats that tend to give energy more than storage. They're the types that flow easier through the body because they aren't as rigid. They aren't as long or sticky. They don't necessarily have the cholesterol attached to them. But you still have them in your diet that's not contributing to that potential, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the things that you're saying there too that's coming up for me is this word variety. which we talk a lot about in the Savor strategies of healing that I use with my clients. And variety is the V in Savor. And so bringing that into the specifics of fats, having a variety of fats that we work with in our kitchen, that we enjoy in our meals. And I think with that variety, not only from the nutrition aspect and the physiological health benefits, but just from the satisfaction too. Like for me, I get a different level of satisfaction having sweet potatoes drizzled with some coconut oil than sweet potatoes drizzled with some olive oil. They're both different. They're delicious, but they're different ways. I might go more of the sweet route with the sweet potatoes with the coconut oil, and more of the savory route with roasted sweet potatoes with a bunch of other vegetables too. So what you're saying there of having that variety with our fats, look at it that way versus, you can never have bacon again, or you can never have butter again, or you should never. Like, nah, don't do that. It's not helpful. Look at it as a
Right.
variety. If have only been having saturated fat from animal foods, maybe I can bring in some more variety by including some more olive oil, some more nuts and seeds and their oils.
Exactly. And that's at the end of the day, I know your goal is probably very similar to my goal, is we should be absolutely enjoying what we eat. We should not just be nourishing our bodies so that we're healthy, we have strong immune systems, we have plenty of energy, but should get joy from it. What sounds really good today? Is it that sort of cinnamon sweet potato that's been baked with a little olive or coconut oil, or is it maybe more that savory chili, oregano, olive oil, salt sort of combo? Now we're all going to have to go out and get stuffed sweet potatoes after that.
Yep, that's on everybody's menu tonight.
Right? Writing it down for those shopping lists right now. So it truly is that. And if we go down, I think, sort of that more dangerous path of the fear around something, of saying, oh my gosh, as I'm aging, I was told I'm officially in perimenopause or menopausal, or even not. Maybe that's not your path at this moment, but you saw that you had high cholesterol, or you're looked at family history and there was something in there that is associated with cholesterol and fat. Instead of going the fear route, okay, all or nothing, it's all gone 100%, that will work for you a few days, weeks, maybe even a few months. But at some point, your body is going to rebel. You're not going to be satisfied by those things anymore. We're going to actually increase the risk of binging and cravings, because you're suddenly not getting what you were nourishing your body with in the first place. So let's swap it out. The oil in your handful of walnuts is totally different than the oils or fats in that cheese or whatever other type of fat you're getting in. Both of them are useful by the body. Both of them are very enjoyable, but one of them has a different structure. It's going to act differently in the body. It's going to nourish different processes in the body. This is one of those, we could go all the way down to another extreme of fats, which is not extreme, but further on in the function of fats. It is a building block of hormones for the body, and we're all wanting to balance out our hormones, have healthy hormone amounts. It is also the building blocks of triggering immune responses, of either triggering more inflammation or triggering that, okay, we're done with inflammation, that message was sent, let's shut it off. And those fats that shut off inflammation, that help encourage that healthy hormone balance, those tend to be more of the omega-3 fatty acid rich hormones, the omega-9 fatty acid rich hormones. And those do tend to come from nuts and seeds. They come from dark leafy greens as well. But if we are sort of just thinking, oh, I can't eat that peanut butter, or I really love that snack mix that has almonds and walnuts and cashews, but I'm concerned because has a higher fat content, and you don't eat those because of the fat, you're actually not giving your body the tools it needs to create those healthy immune responses to actually decrease inflammation. And once again, the dry skin, and specifically with menopause and perimenopausal, even drying of like vaginal walls, all of this, we need those healthy fats to stop that process or slow that process down. So those are signs when I see people one-on-one and they say, I'm really battling with dryness, I'm battling with all of these things. Obviously, I look at fluid intake, but fat is the number one, like big bells go off. I want to see, are you having enough fat? Are you actually giving this in? And are you having those cravings? Are you able to satisfy? Fat also slows down digestive processes. So if you're finding that, okay, you know what, I had a meal, I had that lunch, felt really good, I enjoyed it. I thought I ate a lot because I was really, really full, but it's been only like 45 minutes or an hour and I'm feeling full again. Or I'm feeling hungry. I'm not so full. Why am I hungry? I ate so much food. Really, you could have digested it, it's moved on, and your body's looking for more energy. When we're including those healthy amounts of fats, that drizzle of olive oil, those nuts and seeds, that slice of avocado, whatever it is that you enjoy, that slows down that process enough that you can stay fuller longer. It slows down the release of that energy. You can go out for that bike ride or sit and have that meeting or go for your walk with your friends and an hour later not feel like I'm already famished. I used up that energy. You're still parsing it out. So there's so many reasons not to just avoid fat at all, beyond just heart health, cholesterol, but hormone balance, skin, energy. It's just so much more than that little snippet of information we get of watch fat. It's too simple.
And I'm glad that you brought in that part about cravings and, even binging or overeating. And what I see often in my clients, the foods that are involved in the binging or the overeating are usually pretty high carb foods, which again, nothing wrong with carbs. But when we look at like the total day or eating experiences leading up to that overeating or binging event, they're often lower in fat, lower in protein, which we're going to get to, and they miss that connection. They just are stuck in this place of like shaming themselves because they've overeaten so much and it was so much carbs, instead of being able to pull back and look at the big picture and go, okay, well, let's get curious about why, because all three of these macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fat, they're so tightly related to each other, and our bodies are designed to have some of all of them. And if we don't have enough of one or the other, our body's going to push us to try to make up for that in one way, shape, or form. At least that's what I find with my clients.
Absolutely. That's 100% true. We need that balance. Our body, there's a reason why we have those sort of three macronutrients. There's none that's more important than the other. We love to, again, following sort of that dieting culture worlds, that whatever's popular at the time, protein is really popular in the assumption that as long as we have a protein dense meal, we're good to go. Well, if you're missing those other macronutrients, your body is still going to be in need. You're still going to be needing these tools that your body does for different processes. Protein can't do it all. Protein does its own job, and it needs support and assistance through fat, through carbohydrates. Now, granted, our body doesn't need as much fat as it does of carbohydrates and protein. That's where sort of our calories come in. And I hate to use that word because it's a trigger word, but truly, by weight, fat has more than double the amount of calories than carbohydrates and protein. which have, by the way, the same exact amount of calories per gram. So all that means, by the way, calories, all calorie means is it means burnable energy. So it's a source of energy for the cell. That's the word calorie, is energy, right? And fats contain twice as much burnable energy as protein and carbohydrates do. So we just need smaller amounts. So we might be eating a cup of more of a carbohydrate or protein dense food, and then we put in a tablespoon or a couple teaspoons drizzle of oil in there. That's great. That's plenty. That's a good balance. It's not that you need a lot. It's not generally that you're needing to keep adding scoops of more fatty food. It's just making sure you have enough. And the whole foods, or rather unrefined foods, so getting your actual nuts and seeds. Avocado is fantastic, but if you're just using avocado oil, well, that's, for like cooking, our more refined food. Eating that actual avocado, even better, because you're getting a balance then. You're getting your healthy fats. You're actually getting in protein. Yes, avocados have protein too. You're getting in some natural carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals. You're getting it already in that balance. So I tend to say if you're eating that unrefined form, especially plant forms, which are going to be higher in the omega-3 fatty acid profile, just that's more of that unlimited. If you feel like having more walnuts in your snack mix, do it. That's not a concern. It already has fiber intact, but by the way, fiber also helps slow down, but it will also bind up excess. So if your body doesn't need it, you're digesting it, your body will store what it needs to store, and then what it doesn't need, as long as you've got fiber, it binds it up so you can excrete it out of the body. So anytime you have that balance, it's just not the concern. Your body, remember, it's a miracle. It knows what to do with these things. It's only when we start trying to manage it, we start saying, okay, we don't want this part of that food. I'm going to take that cheese that naturally has fat in it. It has a natural balance of fat and protein, and I'm going to alter in a way that wouldn't necessarily naturally be done, and remove all the fat from it or remove the majority from it. And then it'll be better for me, or it'll be healthier for me. All that's going to happen is we're going to start adding more salt, we're going to start adding more other things to try to make up for that missing component. You just know something's missing from that. Our taste buds know something's missing from that sort of fat-free version of what naturally wouldn't be. So having that, enjoying that moment where you can just, what sounds good right now? You know what, with that, we're going to keep using our sweet potatoes. We baked up that sweet potato, and now I'm doing some, feta cheese and olives. That sounds really amazing to me right now. Do it. Enjoy it. And the likelihood that you'll be like, that was great. I loved it. I'm pretty full. I'm feeling good. If I have leftovers, it goes in the fridge for later when I'm feeling great, versus saying, okay, I don't want to have the fat. I'm going to do fat-free feta. And I'm not going to have the olives. I'm going to, because I can't do that. I'm just going to add salt. What's going to happen is you're going to eat it and go, okay, I'm full, but I wasn't satisfied. Now
Yeah.
what can I do?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you used that word, because that's how I'll often answer the question for folks, because the question of how much always comes up, right? Always comes up,
Yeah.
especially when we've lived through the fat-free era. And I like how you describe that ratio of if you're having the whole grains and say it's a cup of this, and then, if we were going to try to drink a cup of olive oil, that wouldn't be very satisfying. But if we think about fat from a satisfaction perspective, it's that ingredient that just kicks up that satisfaction a little bit more. So again, we don't need a bunch for the satisfaction. In fact, if we had maybe, quote unquote, too much. Like I said, try to do the 1-to-1, a cup of the whole grain to a cup of the olive oil. Like that just probably wouldn't be very satisfying. Like our palate would just go, what is this? I don't know what to do with this. So one, trusting that mouthfeel, that taste, both if you're getting enough and if you're not getting enough, right? Like you were saying, well, maybe I just taste the seasonings and the salt, but now I'm still kind of rummaging around for something else to eat. That's probably because there wasn't satisfaction from the fat too. So I like
Yeah,
that word, using satisfaction, and particularly with fat, and to encourage people to think about fat from that perspective versus into that, how many grams or how many calories is this? And if you lead with that satisfaction, that's going to be a pretty accurate guide towards how much fat do you want to have on whatever it is you're eating.
absolutely. And like I said, it comes back to joy. Are we enjoying our food? Are we feeling satisfied? And when we are enjoying and feeling satisfied, we're also feeling energized. We're also feeling energized. Just to bring one little scientific, extra scientific part of this as well, when looking at later in life adults, so ones who are entering perimenopause, ones who have gone through menopause already and are on the other side, and we're looking at risks of disease states. Some interesting data has actually recently come out that shows the difference in dietary methods and risk levels. And what they found was that for different calorie intakes, people who were either monitoring calories, those who were following reduced or specific calorie counts for diets, the rate of illnesses or disease states actually had no impact whatsoever for any of the ranges of total calories. Calorie intake actually didn't have an impact. What did have an impact was the quantity of saturated fat, specifically long chain saturated fats, those ones that tend to be tied to cholesterol levels. So, for example, the groups that were following lower calorie diets, if they still had a high level or an imbalance, I would say, of those cholesterol-laden saturated fats over other fats, that had the same exact amount of risk increase as people who had higher calorie diets, whose focus was also on the increase of saturated fats that were those cholesterol-laden ones. What that means is you can still have a really high calorie diet, let's say if that's something of concern, or a low calorie diet. The calories themselves didn't matter. It was the balance at the end of the day. Do we have the proper balance or a satisfying balance to your body and your personal needs of fats to proteins to carbohydrates? Then you're good to go. The total calories themselves didn't matter. It was those who were favoring the higher level of fat intake, specifically from those saturated cholesterol-laden sources, and not having the other balance or variety in there that had more impact. So always, at the end of the day, I recommend throwing that total calorie count out the window. It doesn't matter. The balance in there, the variety in there, that is what's important. Your body
Yeah,
knows what to do.
that's really interesting. I'm glad that you brought that up, because that total calorie amount is still such a problem for those of us in midlife, because part of that fat-free era was also, it was tying more of that calories to fat and fat to calories, from what I remember growing
Right.
up. And so, the two kind of went hand in hand. I'm scared about eating too much fat, aka I'm scared about eating too much calories, aka I'm scared about gaining weight. So that's a really
Mhm.
interesting study to bring up. I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm wondering if we can talk about it from the kitchen perspective too. So from a culinary perspective, like you've described so well, that how these fats are different nutritionally and why we might want one for this reason or this for reason over here. But when it comes to the cooking, I wonder if you can give us some tips of how do we decipher whether I'm going to use the olive oil or I'm going to use the butter or I'm going to use the bacon fat or the lard, or just the nuts and the olives and the avocados. When might I want to use any of those in order to get the best satisfaction out of the meal and have the recipe come out the way that I'm hoping that it will?
That is very important. The recipe turning out is key. I can tell you that certain oils have way higher omega-3 fatty acid content, that wonderful fat that we actually tend to be deficient in. We don't get enough of, so we want more of it. So things like hemp seeds, hemp seed oil, flaxseed oil, they are fabulous sources of those omega-3 fats, those wonderful heart healthy fats, if you like that label. The problem is, if we tried to cook with those oils, we put it in the pan and we could take our, go out to our garden for our organic heirloom broccoli and we picked that and then we wanted to just do a quick saute of that broccoli and we put it in the pan and we cooked with it. That would be not good at all. Number one, it would be terrible tasting. We would maybe even start a little fire. And that's because those oils have something called a really low smoke point. And if you're wondering what smoke point is, you may have unexpectedly experienced it. It literally is just when that oil starts to burn. And that's when we make that oil essentially rancid, bad. We're getting terrible taste from it, but it's also not healthy for the body to have burned oils. And all oils have different smoke points. The ones that tend to be really high in those good omega-3 fatty acids, they don't do well with heat. So anytime we are doing something like making a salad dressing, I say, we don't have to use those sort of flavorless oils, the canola oil, anything like that. Commercial salad dressings do that because it's more stable on the shelf. They don't have other flavors to them. Often those oils are bleached as well, so no flavor comes out and only the flavor of the vinegar or the herbs that they're using is highlighted. And then it won't go rancid fast. But when we're at home making dressing, I know the whole point of the dressing, right, is flavor. So that's the perfect time to use those types of oils. That's your unrefined walnut oil, your hemp seed oil, your flaxseed oil, anything that has a lot of color to it naturally, it does tend to have a lot of flavor to it. I think has almost like a hemp seed oil has almost more walnut flavor to me, or walnut scent, than walnuts themselves. So sometimes I want that really rich, nutty flavor. Use that in a salad dressing. Use that flavor to your advantage. You don't then have to add other things to it because you already have that nutty flavor. So using them that way. Then when we're talking about actually cooking, oh, by the way, I want to be clear, like if you just made yourself some pasta, for example, you took it out, it's still nice and hot, and you think, ooh, I want that nutty oil flavor, and you wanted to drizzle some hemp seed oil over the top, that's great. You can do that. You just don't want to put it into your frying pan and cook it at that high heat. So it's not that it can't be exposed to heat. It's just not made for cooking heat. It's not in the hundreds of degrees sort of heat. Otherwise, I like to keep it really simple. Really, really simple. I don't want anybody going out and saying, okay, I have to buy sesame oil, walnut oil, hemp seed oil, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, some coconut oil. Now that it's also getting more popular, now I have to go get my free range pork lard and then, all these different oils in your kitchen. You can have maybe as many as 3, but 1 or 2 is plenty. So first and foremost, don't feel like now you have to go out and buy a bunch of stuff. I like to keep it really simple. So just a good olive oil. And by good, I mean an extra virgin olive oil, something that has that lovely fruity scent to it. It can be used for so many things. It can be used for that salad dressing. It can be used for sauteing your veggies. It can be used for roasting. It could be used for drizzling over top of your pasta. It has flavor to it. Again, flavor means a few things. It means that there's other nutrients present. It means that you're satisfying your taste buds. It also means that you're giving your cells that lovely fat that it needs to satisfy the body. So olive oils are just a good general fat to have on hand. Now, I heard you from the ethers, from the spirits already. Those alarm bells were going off. Wait, Amy, I heard. I can't fry with olive oil. They told me never to heat olive oil. Okay, so there's folks out there who are going to say that. And what I remind you of is that smoke point. Did you put that olive oil in the pan? Did it start smoking all the way already? Okay, that was too high of a heat. But olive oil can have kind of a higher smoke point. You don't have to be concerned if you were roasting your veggies in that oil. That's okay. If you have an oil, there's certain brands that actually will put on their bottle what heats are safe to use that for. I think Spectrum brand is one of them. Barlean's, if you have it in your area, is another one that if it's not directly on the bottle, if you go to their website, they tell you the heats. I like the ones that not just say something like, oh, 400 degrees, but they actually have the dial, because most of us on our stovetop, we're turning to medium high. We don't know what 400 degrees on our stovetop means. But it can be as easy as that. So I say, olive oil is the good. If you just want one thing, get yourself a extra virgin olive oil. It's not super high in omega-3 fats, but it's also not going to have the cholesterol or anything like that. Now, the third sort of window of cooking is maybe you do like to stir fry. Maybe you broil or roast at like 500 degrees or more. Maybe you like a good char on your food. You're searing. You're just going to need a really high heat, high smoke point oil or fat. And those tend to be the more refined oils, and that's okay. These aren't oils that are necessarily going to be ones that your body has to have for health, but it's also okay to have in small amounts. You can, sear your scallops. And I'm just using words now because it's just whatever it is you're doing with that at higher heat. You can make your stir fry that you're already heating up your pan or your wok to high heat to start. You're going to want to be using either something like grapeseed oil or refined sesame oil, or this is where that sort of like bacon fat, lard, they can usually take on higher heats and not have that smoke point. Refined coconut oil can do that. Anything that's refined has a higher smoke content because they don't have the same components that are going to burn. They've been essentially refined out. They've been taken out. So those are I do like to keep those around because every now and again I am doing that higher heat cooking. Those also are going to be the fats that tend not to have a lot of flavor to them. They might, in fact, have zero flavor. So those are going to be those oils that you're not necessarily going to want to drizzle over your pasta because it's not going to give you any flavor. If you are literally just putting oil on your pasta to keep it from sticking, there's so many other ways you can do that. That's a whole nother topic, but use one of those oils that is flavorful, right? That extra virgin olive oil, that hemp seed oil, that's going to give you that satisfaction. So different oils are used, or different fats are used for different things. If you, you want butter on your toast, get butter on your toast. if your physician, your healthcare team has specifically said, we've got high risk factors. You've got arteries that have a lot of plaque in them that do have closing up. We need to really curb back on this cholesterol. We need to really nail down on this. Then that's where you say, okay, I need to look at those cholesterol laden foods. Something like butter has a lot of cholesterol. It's a fat food, but it doesn't mean you have to take out the fat. So instead of on your toast of having butter, you might choose some coconut oil or a little olive oil. The key here is don't avoid fat completely. What is it about the fat that is the concern? And is there a concern? Clarify first that there is a concern. You know, ask for one of those scans if you are concerned about high cholesterol levels. See, do you have plaques that are forming? Do you have actual risk factor? Or are we going by this average that was just created from these far extremes that isn't actually a problem for you and your body? So those are just some suggestions. Amanda, maybe you have some other ideas about different types of fats that are delightful.
Yeah, well, no, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of all the different types. But as I was listening to you describe like when we're going to choose different types of oils or different types of fat in the kitchen, the other kind of key takeaway that came up for me was we have fat for flavor and we have fat for function. And so
Yes.
if we're going for that flavor part, okay, then we're going to use more of those lower smoke point oils and less refined oils, because I think you did a great job of explaining that when they're unrefined, they keep in some of those components that create flavor. And so for people listening to decide when I'm looking at a recipe or there's something that I know that I want to make, decide, is fat, the purpose of fat in this recipe, is it for flavor or is it for function? And have that help them guide, well, which type of fat am I going to use? So I think that fat for flavor or fat for function is really key. And then two, just to sum up, like this idea of fat for satisfaction and looking at it from that perspective, adding more variety of fats and oils into our kitchen space and into our eating experiences. And I really love that you brought up that getting that artery scan too, and assessing. Like so many times I think people, they get scared of like, I don't want to go to the doctor. I don't want to get the tests. I don't want to get the assessments because I'm afraid of what I'll learn. But that also sets us up for going down all kinds of these diet culture related rabbit holes under the assumption that, well, I'm over 40, like this must be my destiny. And the other thing that you said too, that I just want to bring home for folks too, as we wrap up this part about fats, is increased risk doesn't mean, and I came up with causation. It doesn't mean that your increased risk means you're going to get the thing, means you're going
Yeah.
to have heart disease, means you're going to have cancer. It's an increased risk. Yeah. So we're not going to ignore it. And we might
Mhm.
become more mindful about getting those scans and having regular checkups with your care team. But again, that psychology of it, the minute that we start thinking like, I'm at an increased risk, I'm going to die, or I'm going to have this problem, we just get so contractive, and then we can get really
Mhm.
tunnel vision. And that tunnel vision paired with the generic recommendations that are out there about fats and midlife, like it can just set us up for going down these crazy rabbit holes. Instead of, we understand that increased risk doesn't mean it's my destiny, but it does mean I have an opportunity to learn more about heart health and fat and cholesterol, but be expansive in terms of what you're learning, what you're experiencing when you have your meals, when you cook. Bring in that variety, bring in the satisfaction. Like when we bring our focus to there, we're more likely to promote our health than when we get into this like clamp down, and then we reduce the satisfaction. And then we're binging and overeating, and we're just constantly end up being on this hamster wheel too. So I love how you described all of that. I think that's really helpful for folks to hear.
Thank you. It's so important, when you're talking about contracting down, and it's so true. We're looking to expand. We're looking to expand joy. Are we going out to exercise because, we feel like we have to, and you're probably going to grumble about it, or you're thinking, actually, it's kind of fun to go out and run around, jog around outside, and it's joyful movement. We don't think about it as a task then. And same thing with foods is if we're trying to contract, if we're trying to shrink down what we're eating to try to have some sort of feeling like we can control, that's actually when the opposite of is really happening. We're actually losing more control. We're losing the true expansiveness. And this whole calories in, calories out, again, damaging viewpoint, it is not that simple. It is not that easy. That is not the way our bodies truly work in fullness. It's about balance. It's about variety. It's about expanding our worlds and not contracting it in. And that's when we're truly going to have a healthy lifestyle, is when we can expand it out, when we do have more joy around it. And that's also what happens when we end up reducing our risk factors, because it's not high cholesterol equals heart health. No, like it's more than that. It's how much fiber do we get in? What types of fats are we having? Are we joyfully moving on a daily basis? And that joyful movement literally could mean stretching in your chair. It could mean going for a run. It could be riding a horse. It could be going for a swim. It means so many different things that are just as beneficial for that body. So hopefully we can also understand, like, okay, I heard this message. What does it actually mean for me? Let me chat about it with my team. Let me see, and go from there. Not taking everything in as being meaningful for you as a blanket. That is an average, and that average comes from a really, really wide spectrum. Until we understand that spectrum, it's probably not actually going to mean 100% for you what that recommendation is. Same thing with protein, which we're going to talk about shortly. But that is also a spectrum.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And that's a nice segue into our next episode on protein. And I will also just add, if anybody listening has questions or wants to ask about their specific situation, you can always go to alpinenutrition.org and click the contact button up at the top. And you're welcome to email me or Amy any questions. I'm happy to relay those to Amy, and we're happy to get back to you to answer your specific questions, because there is a lot of misinformation or just not complete information out there when it comes to fats and even carbs too, if you've listened to the carb episode. And so we're happy to help you kind of sort through all of that. So you're always welcome to do that. So Amy, thanks for leading us through all of the wilds of fats. And we'll look forward to talking about protein in our next episode.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amanda.